April 1814. A man who once commanded 500,000 soldiers now stands on a balcony overlooking a courtyard barely 50 meters wide. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, conqueror of Europe, architect of a new world order, holds a vial of poison against the light. The liquid catches the afternoon sun. Beautiful. Final. He has lost everything in 3 weeks. His armies shattered. His empire collapsed. His marshals, men who bled beside him from Egypt to Moscow, have abandoned him. Even his wife refuses to follow him into exile. The poison is a gift from his personal physician. Insurance against capture, against humiliation. He drinks it. Nothing happens. The dose is too weak or too old, or his physician could not bear to give him an effective poison. Napoleon vomits through the night, survives, and accepts exile to Elba, a tiny island he will rule like a prison. This is not where his story begins, but it is where we must start. Because everything Napoleon became, every conquest, every crown, every catastrophic decision, was built on a foundation of insufficiency. The feeling that he was not enough, would never be enough, could never stop proving he was enough. Napoleon Bonaparte was not born French. This fact would haunt him his entire life. Corsica became French property only 1 year before his birth in 1769. The island still bled from resistance to occupation. His father, Carlo, had fought alongside Corsican rebels before pragmatically switching sides when defeat became inevitable. The family spoke Italian at home, Corsican in the streets, French only when necessary for survival. Young Napoleon, or Napoleone Bonaparte, as he was christened, absorbed a simple truth. Identity is negotiable. Loyalty is tactical. Belonging must be earned through force. When his father secured him a scholarship to French military school, 9-year-old Napoleon arrived speaking French with a thick accent. His classmates were sons of ancient noble families. Their families had owned French soil for generations. Their right to rule was assumed, inherited, unquestioned. Napoleon had to justify his existence every day. The other boys mocked his accent, called him a foreigner, a colonist playing at being French. He responded with rage and withdrawal, spent hours alone reading military history, mathematics, ancient Rome, building an interior world where merit mattered more than bloodline. This is where the pattern formed. Isolation breeds ambition. Rejection fuels obsession. When you are told you do not belong, you can either disappear or force the world to acknowledge you exist. Napoleon chose acknowledgement through mastery. If birth would not grant him legitimacy, brilliance would. If heritage could not open doors, capability would kick them down. But brilliance creates its own trap. Once you prove yourself through achievement, you cannot stop achieving. The moment you pause, the world remembers you are an outsider. So you conquer the next thing, and the next, and the next, until conquest becomes identity, until you cannot separate who you are from what you have taken. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, most of the old military establishment fled or was executed. An entire officer class evaporated within months. For Napoleon, this was not tragedy, it was opportunity. He was 20 years old, a junior artillery officer with no connections and no prospects. In the old system, his Corsican birth and minor nobility meant he would spend decades waiting for promotion that might never come. But revolution destroys hierarchies. And into hierarchical vacuums, ambitious men pour like water, finding cracks. Napoleon watched France tear itself apart with the cold assessment of a surgeon observing a wound. He did not care about liberty or equality or fraternity. He cared about the structures those ideas destroyed and what might be built in their place. In 1793, at the Siege of Toulon, he demonstrated the philosophy that would define his career. Identify the critical point. Apply overwhelming force. Accept casualties as calculations, not tragedies. His artillery placements broke the siege. He was promoted to brigadier general at 24. Not because he was loved, but because he was effective. And in revolution, effectiveness is the only virtue that matters. But effectiveness alone does not build legend. For that, you need narrative control. Napoleon understood something most military men did not. Battles are won twice. Once on the field, and again in how they are reported. He cultivated journalists, wrote his own dispatches, shaped his victories into mythology, even as they were happening. The Italian campaign of 1796 to 97 made him famous not just because he won, but because he controlled how France heard about those victories. Hungry soldiers transformed into heroes. Desperate gambles reported as brilliant strategies. Luck reframed as destiny. By the time he returned to Paris, he was more than a general. He was a story France told itself. The revolutionary hero, the young genius, the man who proved merit could triumph over aristocracy. And Napoleon, who had spent his childhood being told he did not belong, finally had something more powerful than acceptance. He had made himself necessary. By 1799, revolutionary France was collapsing under its own contradictions. The government, the Directory, was corrupt, ineffective, and universally despised. The economy bled. Enemies surrounded French borders. The dream of liberty had curdled into factional violence and paralysis. France needed saving. Or perhaps more accurately, France needed to believe it needed saving. Napoleon provided that belief. The coup of 18 Brumaire was not a military takeover in the traditional sense. It was political theater dressed as necessity. Napoleon presented himself not as a conqueror of France, but as France's reluctant savior. The man forced by circumstances to take power because no one else could restore order. This became his template. Create or exaggerate a crisis. Position yourself as the only solution. Consolidate power while claiming you are merely responding to necessity. Within weeks of the coup, Napoleon was first consul, effectively dictator, though the title sounded more republican. Within 3 years, he was consul for life. Within 5, he crowned himself emperor. Each expansion of power was presented as a reluctant acceptance of what France demanded. The people want stability. The people need authority. The people require a strong hand. But here is the psychological trap. When you take power by claiming to be necessary, you can never admit you might be expendable. Your identity becomes fused with your function. You are not Napoleon Bonaparte who happens to rule France. You are the force holding France together. And without you, chaos returns. This belief that you are the irreplaceable center justifies anything. Censorship becomes protecting the people from dangerous ideas. Surveillance becomes ensuring stability. Arresting critics becomes defending the nation. Napoleon created the most sophisticated police state Europe had seen. His Minister of Police, Joseph Fouché, built networks of informants that penetrated every salon, every cafe, every government office. Mail was opened. Conversations reported. Dissent quietly disappeared. The newspapers that had once celebrated him now printed only what his censors approved. Books required government permission. Theater productions were reviewed for political content. Even private letters were suspect. And Napoleon justified all of it with the same logic. I am protecting France. Without control, there is chaos. Without me, there is disaster. But protection and paranoia are separated by only a thin membrane. And that membrane grows thinner with every year of power. Between 1805 and 1812, Napoleon fought almost continuously. Austerlitz, Jena, Friedland, Wagram, a constellation of victories that seemed to prove his invincibility. But look deeper at the pattern. Each victory created temporary peace. Each peace treaty lasted only months before Napoleon found reasons to resume war. Each resumption was justified as defensive, responding to violations, preventing future threats, securing France's borders. The borders, conveniently, kept expanding. This is the psychology of the conqueror who cannot stop conquering. War had given Napoleon everything: identity, legitimacy, glory, purpose. To stop fighting was to risk becoming ordinary. To accept peace was to face the possibility that he was enough as he was. He could not accept that possibility. His marshals grew weary. Men who had followed him for 15 years began suggesting compromise. Perhaps keep what we have won. Perhaps consolidate. Perhaps choose peace while we are still strong. Napoleon perceived this as weakness, as betrayal, as failure to understand that stopping meant dying. The invasion of Russia in 1812 reveals this addiction in its purest form. Russia was not threatening France. The Tsar had violated the continental system. Napoleon's attempt to economically strangle Britain, but this could have been resolved diplomatically. Napoleon chose invasion, not because it was strategically necessary, but because he could not imagine not invading. Because conquest was how he understood himself. Because to be Napoleon was to advance, and to stop advancing was to cease being Napoleon. He assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen, 600,000 men, 20 different nationalities, a force so massive it took days just to pass a single point on the road. He marched them into Russia in June. By December, fewer than 40,000 would return. The disaster was not bad luck. It was the logical conclusion of a man who had mistaken conquest for destiny and momentum for inevitability. Russia's space and winter defeated him, but these were predictable. His marshals warned him. His logistics officers showed him the numbers. He invaded anyway. Because he was Napoleon, because he had never failed before, because admitting that some things could not be conquered was admitting that he might be limited, human, fallible. The frozen retreat from Moscow broke something in the myth. Not immediately. Napoleon would fight for 2 more years, win occasional tactical victories, rally armies through sheer force of will. But the aura of invincibility was gone. And once enemies smell weakness, they circle. The fascinating thing about Napoleon's final campaigns is watching a brilliant mind continue to operate at high capacity while the foundation beneath it crumbles. After Russia, Europe united against him. Prussia, Austria, Russia, Britain, nations that had spent centuries fighting each other, now shared a single goal: removing Napoleon from power. He should have negotiated, should have accepted reduced borders, should have saved what could be saved. Instead, he doubled down, raised new armies, fought with the same aggressive tactics that had worked for 15 years. Won battles at Dresden and Lutzen that in earlier years would have ended wars. But now victories changed nothing. His enemies simply rebuilt their armies and returned, because they understood something Napoleon could not accept. This was no longer about territory or treaties. This was about removing him specifically. The psychological pressure manifested physically. Napoleon, who had once survived on 4 hours of sleep and reviewed reports while riding between battles, now showed signs of exhaustion, weight gain, periods of lethargy, difficulty concentrating. He was 44 years old and looked 60. 25 years of war had consumed him from inside. At Leipzig in October 1813, the Battle of Nations, he commanded 190,000 men against 380,000 coalition troops. He fought brilliantly for 3 days. But brilliance cannot overcome mathematics. The French army was destroyed. By April 1814, Paris fell. His marshals refused to continue fighting. His Senate voted to depose him. The empire he had built through will and warfare collapsed in weeks. And Napoleon, who had defined himself through conquest, suddenly had nothing to conquer. The Allies offered him Elba, a Mediterranean island 27 kilometers long. He would be emperor there, a title without meaning, a kingdom the size of a provincial city. For a man who had ruled from Madrid to Warsaw, from Amsterdam to Rome, Elba was not exile. It was burial while still breathing. He lasted 10 months. In February 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba with 1,000 soldiers and landed in France. It should have been suicide. The French government sent armies to arrest him. But when the soldiers saw him, this small man in a familiar hat, they did not fire. They remembered the victories, the glory, the feeling of being part of something larger than themselves. Within 3 weeks, he was back in Paris without firing a shot. The Bourbon king fled. Napoleon reclaimed the throne. The 100 Days, historians call it. Napoleon's final act. He promised a reformed empire, a constitutional monarchy, peace with Europe, all the things he had never delivered before, offered now with sudden sincerity. Europe was not interested in reform Napoleon. They raised another coalition, 700,000 men sworn to end this permanently. At Waterloo, June 18, 1815, Napoleon commanded for the last time. He made tactical errors he would not have made 15 years earlier, delayed the attack, misused his cavalry, failed to coordinate his forces. But even diminished, even exhausted, even facing inevitable defeat, he was still brilliant. The battle was extraordinarily close. For hours, either side could have won. Then the Prussians arrived. Wellington's line held. The Imperial Guard, Napoleon's elite veterans who had never broken, shattered under British fire. Napoleon fled the battlefield, briefly considered continuing the fight from Paris. But even he recognized the end when it came. This time, the British were not generous. No pleasant Mediterranean island. They sent him to St. Helena, a volcanic rock in the South Atlantic, one of the most remote places on Earth. Impossible to escape, perfect for forgetting. He would die there 6 years later at 51 of stomach cancer or possibly arsenic poisoning. Even his death remains debated, unclear, consumed by the mythology he spent a lifetime building. What remains when we strip away the legend? A man of extraordinary intelligence who could not distinguish between brilliance and obsession. A military genius who confused tactical success with strategic wisdom. A leader who inspired millions but trusted no one. A revolutionary who became everything the revolution opposed. Napoleon reorganized Europe's legal systems, created educational institutions, rationalized government administration. The Napoleonic Code still influences law across continents. In this, his legacy is undeniably constructive. But those achievements exist alongside 50 battles, 6 million dead, and a continent ravaged by 2 decades of nearly continuous war. A price paid in blood for one man's inability to accept limitation. He was not evil. Evil requires intention to harm for its own sake. Napoleon was something more complex and perhaps more dangerous. A man who needed constant validation, who equated expansion with existence, who could not separate his identity from his accomplishments. He became a prisoner of his own success. Each victory created the expectation of another. Each conquest made peace feel like failure. Each moment of stillness threatened to reveal that underneath the legend was simply a man, brilliant, flushed, and fundamentally unsatisfied. The question is not whether Napoleon was great. By any measure of impact, he was. The question is whether greatness justifies its cost, whether genius excuses its consequences, whether we can admire capability while condemning its application. History has spent 2 centuries debating Napoleon. Was he a tyrant or a reformer? A military genius or a warmonger? A product of his time or a man who shaped his era? Perhaps he was all of these. Perhaps he was simply what happens when extraordinary capability meets insatiable need for recognition, when childhood wounds become empires, when personal inadequacy requires continental conquest to heal. The Corsican boy who never felt French enough died believing he had proven his worth. But to whom? The classmates who mocked him were long dead. The aristocrats who rejected him had been swept away. The world that denied him belonging no longer existed. He had conquered everyone except the part of himself that felt insufficient. Can anyone possess that much power without being consumed by it? Can ambition ever be satisfied? Or does achievement simply reset the baseline of what feels necessary? Is it possible to be driven by inadequacy and also to know when enough is enough? Napoleon spent his life trying to prove he was exceptional. In doing so, he demonstrated something universal, that the need for validation can never be satisfied by external achievement. That conquest of nations or of self-doubt is not the same as peace. He wanted to be remembered as great. History granted that wish. But perhaps the greater question is, at what point does the cost of greatness exceed its value? And who pays that cost? The great man or everyone around him? What do you think? Can extraordinary individuals justify extraordinary costs? Or does history simply repeat the same pattern? Brilliant men convinced their ambitions serve larger purposes while the world burns around their certainty? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to explore more about the psychology of power and the rulers who could not escape their own legends, subscribe to Dark Ages Chronicles. Because every empire is built on ambition, and every ambition begins with something missing.